After my son banned me from his wedding for being awkward, I was left heartbroken. But while he was busy curating his perfect day, I was busy planning my own secret celebration, one that would end up stealing his spotlight. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. The call, when it came, felt less like a surprise and more like the final, dreaded confirmation of a diagnosis I had been refusing to accept. I was in my greenhouse, a glass sanctuary filled with the earthy scent of damp soil and the sweet perfume of my prize-winning orchids. This was my peace, my quiet corner of the world I had meticulously rebuilt for myself since my husband Richard had passed. My hands, gloved and stained with honest dirt, were gently repotting a delicate phalaenopsis, its petals the color of a fading sunset. My phone, resting on the rustic potting bench, began to buzz. Its modern, insistent vibration was a jarring intrusion into the analog tranquility of the space. The screen lit up with a picture of my son, Daniel, smiling broadly from a sailboat. The very image of the successful, carefree life he now led. A knot of apprehension tightened in my stomach. He rarely called on a weekday afternoon. Calls like this were never just a chat. They were scheduled, purposeful, and almost always a prelude to some uncomfortable request. I pulled off my gloves, wiped my hands on my apron, and answered, composing my voice into a mask of maternal warmth. "Daniel, sweetheart, what a nice surprise." "Hey, Mom," he said. His voice was strained, lacking its usual easy confidence. There was a forced brightness to it, the sound of a man about to deliver a carefully rehearsed and deeply unpleasant speech. I could almost hear the coaching in the background, the silent, directing presence of his fiancée, Chloe. "I know you're busy, so I won't keep you," he began. A classic conversational gambit to signal that this was, in fact, going to be a difficult conversation. "The orchids are well, thank you," I replied, my voice calm. "And I'm not busy at all. What's on your mind, dear?" He cleared his throat. I could hear the faint, distant clink of a glass, fortifying himself. "Well, Chloe and I were just finalizing some of the last-minute details for the wedding." The wedding. The word hung in the air between us, a glittering, multifaceted thing of great expense and even greater stress. For 6 months, it had been the sun around which my son's world revolved. A lavish affair at a 5-star resort on the Cape, chosen not for sentimental value, but for its exclusivity and photogenic qualities. "That's wonderful," I said. The knot in my stomach was now a cold, hard stone. "Right. Yeah. Beautiful," he stammered. "And that's kind of what I'm calling about, Mom. About the day. About the atmosphere." He was circling the point, a nervous pilot afraid to land the plane. I decided to grant him a small mercy and clear the runway myself. "Daniel," I said, my voice softening just a fraction. "Just say what you need to say." A long, heavy pause. I could hear him take a deep breath, the sound of a man about to jump. The dreaded diagnosis, the one I had seen in the symptoms of 100 small slights and exclusions over the past year, was about to be delivered. "Okay," he finally said, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial tone, as if we were discussing a sensitive business deal rather than the demolition of my maternal heart. "Look, Mom, you know how important this day is to Chloe, to her family. Everything has to be perfect. It's not just a wedding. It's a merger of families, you know." I did not know. My own wedding to his father had been a simple affair in this very garden, with 50 of our closest friends and a home-baked cake. "And Chloe," he continued, the words now coming in a practiced, defensive rush. He was reading from a script, one written, edited, and approved by his fiancée. "She has a very specific vision for it. It's about creating a seamless, harmonious atmosphere. A day where there's no friction. No. Dissonant energy. Dissonant energy. The phrase was pure Chloe, a piece of pop psychology jargon used to justify a simple, ugly prejudice. And you feel that I would be a source of dissonant energy? I asked. My voice was preternaturally calm. I was a landscape architect by trade. I understood harmony. I also knew when a weed was being politely but ruthlessly targeted for removal. He seized on my question with palpable relief. That's just it, Mom. You know, Chloe doesn't really connect with you. You're just from different worlds. She finds you a little intense. Your style is very different. And her parents' friends, well, they're a certain type. If you come, he said, and here was the blade, you'll just make it awkward for everyone. My intensity was a euphemism for the fact that I read books instead of fashion magazines. My different world was one where a person's value wasn't measured by their social media following. He wasn't finished. And honestly, Mom, it would be awkward for you too. You wouldn't know anyone. We just thought. It would be kinder, really, to not put you in that uncomfortable position. He was framing my exclusion as an act of kindness. He was not a son casting his mother aside. He was a thoughtful host. It was the most dishonest, cowardly, and deeply insulting thing anyone had ever said to me. The silence that followed was profound. He was not just uninviting me from a party. He was formally evicting me from my role as his mother, deeming me an unsuitable accessory that would clash with the aesthetic of his new life. The hurt was a physical thing, a sharp, cold blade twisting in my chest. I could have screamed. I could have wept. I could have reminded him of every late night I had nursed him through a fever, of the unwavering love I had given him for 34 years. But as the seconds ticked by, something else took over. A strange, cold, clarifying calm. It was the moment a patient accepts the grim diagnosis. The uncertainty was over. This was the logical conclusion of a long, slow campaign to render me irrelevant. And I decided, in that split second, that I was not going to give them the satisfaction of a fight. I was not going to play the role of the hysterical, rejected mother they so clearly expected me to be. I was not going to give them a single ounce of dissonant energy. I processed the hurt, acknowledged it, and then filed it away in a cold, secure vault in my mind. When I finally spoke, my voice was perfectly serene. I understand, Daniel, I said. The words in their quiet acceptance were devastating. My easy agreement seemed to stun him more than any outburst would have. He had been braced for a storm. He was not prepared for a calm blue sky. Oh, he stammered. Oh, good. I mean, thank you for understanding, Mom. I knew you would. It's for the best. Yes, I said. I'm sure it is. Now you should get back to your planning. It sounds like you have a lot to do. Right. Yes, we do, he said, clearly eager to escape. I'll call you after the honeymoon. You do that, dear, I said. And Daniel, I truly hope you have a perfect day. I ended the call. I placed the phone back on the potting bench. I looked down at my hands. They were not shaking. I did not crumble. I did not sit in the greenhouse and weep into my orchids. The hurt was there, a deep, cold ache, but it was a quiet grief, a mourning for the son I had lost, not to death, but to the hollow allure of a world I had no desire to be a part of. I finished my potting, cleaned my tools with methodical precision, and went back into the house. The house itself was a testament to the life I had built, the life Daniel and Chloe found so awkward. It was not a sterile, minimalist showpiece like Chloe's parents' home. It was warm, filled with books, art, and the comfortable, well-loved furniture Richard and I had collected over 40 years. Every object had a story. It was a home, a museum of a life well spent. I was in the kitchen, making a cup of strong, restorative English breakfast tea, when I heard the familiar sound of a key in the front door. "Eleanor!" A man's voice called out, rich and warm with a faint European accent. "I come bearing gifts." Julian Croft walked into the kitchen. He was a charismatic, worldly man of 65, his face a handsome, craggy landscape of laugh lines. His silver hair was a little unruly, his blue eyes bright with intelligence and humor. He was holding a bouquet of brilliant yellow sunflowers and a bottle of expensive French champagne. "I was passing the florist, and these seemed particularly cheerful," he said, handing me the flowers. "And this," he placed the champagne on the counter, "is for no reason at all, which is always the best reason to celebrate." This was my secret life. This was Julian. We had met a year ago at a fundraiser for the Botanical Gardens. He was a retired foreign correspondent, a man who had spent his life covering global events. He was witty, intelligent, and utterly unimpressed by the superficial status that so obsessed Chloe's world. He had looked at me not as Daniel's intense mother, but as Eleanor Hayes, a fascinating woman in her own right. Our relationship had blossomed quickly, a late-in-life love affair that had filled my quiet, widowed world with a passion I had never expected to feel again. He was the antithesis of everything Daniel and Chloe's life represented. He valued conversation over connections, experiences over acquisitions. He was, in every sense of the word, my future. We had kept our relationship quiet, not out of shame, but out of a desire to protect it from the inevitable judgment of my son and his fiancée. Daniel knew Julian only as a friend. He had no idea that Julian had moved in 3 months ago, that his books were now interspersed with mine, that we had just last week, quietly and joyfully, decided to get married. As Julian put the sunflowers in a vase, he noticed the subtle tension in my shoulders. "What is it, my love?" he asked, his voice full of gentle concern. I told him. I recounted the conversation with Daniel, repeating the clumsy, hurtful justifications, the talk of dissonant energy and awkwardness. I told him, my voice steady, that I had been formally uninvited from my only son's wedding. Julian listened, his back to me as he arranged the flowers. I could see his knuckles were white where he gripped the vase. When I finished, he turned around. His handsome face was a mask of cold, quiet fury, a fury not at me, but for me. "The blind, arrogant little fool," he said, his voice a low growl. He came to me, took my hands in his, and looked me directly in the eyes. "He doesn't deserve you, Eleanor. He doesn't deserve to have you in the same room, let alone at his wedding." His unwavering support was a balm on my wounded soul. I was not a rejected mother sitting alone in her empty house. I was a beloved woman, standing in my beautiful home with the man who saw me, who cherished me, who was ready to fight for me. Daniel had tried to cast me out into the cold, but he had no idea I was already living in a world filled with warmth and light. The scene shifts. We are no longer in my warm, book-filled home, but in its polar opposite, a cavernous, minimalist penthouse overlooking the city, a landscape of white leather, chrome, and glass. Daniel hangs up the phone. A profound and unfamiliar unease settles over him. He feels a pang of loss, a feeling that he has just severed a cord he didn't know was still attached. My reaction, or lack thereof, was deeply unsettling. He had steeled himself for tears, for recriminations, for an argument that would have validated his decision, proving me to be the difficult woman Chloe always said I was. But my quiet, serene acceptance had thrown him completely off balance. It felt less like surrender and more like a dismissal, as if my exclusion was a matter of supreme indifference to me. Chloe Sterling glides into the room, a vision in beige cashmere. She is beautiful in a brittle, high-maintenance way. She holds 2 crystal glasses of champagne. "Well?" she asks, her voice a low, perfectly modulated purr. "How did it go? Was she terribly dramatic?" There is a gleam of eager anticipation in her eyes. She is hoping for a story she can later share with her friends about her intense future mother-in-law. "No," Daniel says, taking a large gulp of champagne. "She was fine with it." Chloe's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rise. "Fine with it? What do you mean, fine with it?" "I mean, she just said, 'I understand.' And that was it. She wished me a perfect day and hung up." A flicker of disappointment crosses Chloe's face. The drama she had hoped for had not materialized, but she is adept at spinning a narrative. "Well, of course," she says, a triumphant little smile playing on her lips. She knows she can't argue with it. She knows she doesn't fit in. "It's for the best, darling. For everyone." She perches on the arm of his white leather sofa, placing a perfectly manicured hand on his arm. "I'm proud of you," she coos. "That must have been so difficult. But you were strong. You protected our day." She is reframing his act of cowardly cruelty as an act of strength. He is not a bad son. He is a protective fiancé. "Now," she continues, her voice brightening, all business. "Now that the unpleasantness is over, we can finally confirm the seating chart with Daddy. Without your mother there, we have a prime spot open at the head table. We can put Judge Harrison there. It will be so much better for networking. And honestly, the wedding photos will be so much more elegant without any clashing elements." Clashing elements. The casual cruelty is breathtaking. She is not just excluding a person. She is curating an event, removing an object that does not fit her aesthetic. Daniel listens, nodding along, allowing her confident narrative to soothe his guilt. He looks around the vast, empty, beautiful room. He has done the right thing. He has protected his perfect day. But the quiet, unsettling feeling of loss, the echo of his mother's serene, untroubled voice, remains a dissonant note in the carefully composed symphony of his perfect life. Back in my sun-drenched kitchen, the scent of Julian's sunflowers filling the air. The initial shock of Daniel's call receded, replaced by a deep, quiet sadness. I had been deemed unworthy of witnessing my only son's marriage. It was a rejection so fundamental it felt like an amputation. Julian poured 2 glasses of the champagne, the bubbles rising in a cheerful, defiant stream. He handed me a glass, his expression a mixture of love and a fierce, simmering anger on my behalf. "So," he said, his voice a low rumble, "the little prince and his wicked queen have decreed that the queen mother is to be banished from the kingdom." His sardonic framing brought a small, sad smile to my face. "Something like that. And you are just going to accept this?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. "You are just going to sit here, in this beautiful house, on the day your son gets married. And what? Water your orchids." "What else is there to do, Julian?" I sighed. "He's made it clear I'm not welcome. To show up would be to prove their point, to create the very awkwardness they're so desperate to avoid." "I'm not suggesting you storm their castle, my love," he said, a new, intense light coming into his eyes. "I am suggesting we build our own." He set his glass down and took both of my hands in his. "Eleanor, we were planning to get married in the spring. A quiet little ceremony at the courthouse. A nice dinner with a few friends. All very sensible. Very age-appropriate." He said the last words with disdain. "But why?" he continued, his voice growing with a passionate energy that was thrilling to behold. "Why should our happiness wait? Why should we be sensible and discreet? Why should you be the one to sit at home, cast aside, and made to feel small on a day that is supposed to be about love? He leaned in closer, his blue eyes blazing with a brilliant, audacious idea. Let's get married on the same day, Eleanor. The proposal was so bold, it took my breath away. Next month, he said, on the very same Saturday that they are having their sterile, joyless little business transaction on the beach. Let's have our own celebration. A real one. Let's fill this house with joy and laughter and music. Let's show them what a real wedding looks like. It was not a petty act of revenge, though there was a delicious, subversive thrill to it. It was a grand, romantic gesture. It was a way to reclaim the day, to transform an occasion of pain into one of profound joy. It was a refusal to be relegated to the shadows. A slow smile spread across my face, the first genuine, joyful smile I had felt all day. The sadness in my heart began to recede, replaced by a surge of defiant, life-affirming energy. Julian Croft, I said, my voice full of a renewed strength. Are you suggesting we upstage my son's wedding? I am suggesting, he said, his own face breaking into a magnificent, roguish grin, that we throw a much, much better party. A party so full of life and love and genuine happiness that their perfectly curated, joyless little event will fade into utter insignificance. So what do you say, Miss Hayes? Will you marry me next month in your own beautiful garden? I looked at this wonderful, charismatic man, this incredible, unexpected gift that life had given me. I thought of my son in his cold, white penthouse, planning a wedding designed to impress strangers. And I thought of myself here, in my warm, vibrant home, being offered a celebration designed purely for the purpose of joy. The choice was not a choice at all. Yes, I said, my voice ringing with a newfound clarity. Yes, I will. The decision, once made, felt like a dam breaking. The passive sadness was washed away by an invigorating flood of purpose and joyful rebellion. We weren't just planning a wedding. We were staging a quiet, elegant coup. That very evening, Julian and I sat in the living room, not with a formal wedding planner's binder, but with a bottle of good Italian red wine and a simple leather-bound notebook. Operation Counter-Wedding, Julian had christened it, with a mischievous twinkle in his eye. The first task was the guest list. This, more than anything, would define the difference between our two worlds. Daniel and Chloe's list, I knew, was a carefully curated document of social and financial assets, a list designed for networking. Ours would be a list designed for joy. My first call was to my younger sister, Margaret, in Florida. She was a fiery, no-nonsense woman with a wicked sense of humor and a fierce loyalty to me. I told her the whole story, from Daniel's insulting call to our audacious new plan. There was a moment of stunned silence, followed by a roar of delighted, incredulous laughter. "You're going to get married on the same day?" she shrieked. "Oh, Eleanor, that is the most gloriously, wonderfully passive-aggressive thing I have ever heard in my life. I'm so proud of you. Of course, I'll be there. I'll be your maid of honor. Does Chloe have a maid of honor, or is she just having a brand ambassador?" Her enthusiastic support was the first brick in our new foundation. Next, I called my real family, the one I had chosen for myself. My two closest friends from my landscape architecture firm, women I'd traveled the world with. They listened with growing outrage. "He uninvited you?" my friend Isabella sputtered, the woman who taught him the difference between a weed and a perennial. "We're there. What can we bring?" Julian, in turn, began to call his circle. It was a fascinating, eclectic group. He called his former editor, a brilliant curmudgeon who had won a Pulitzer Prize. He called a celebrated photojournalist, a woman who had documented conflicts in a dozen countries. He called a young novelist he had mentored, an artist he'd met in Paris, a chef he'd befriended in Rome. Each call followed the same pattern: shocked silence, an explosion of outrage on my behalf, and then an enthusiastic, "We're in. How can we help?" Within 24 hours, we had a guest list of 50 people, not CEOs and socialites, but artists, writers, thinkers, and lifelong friends. It was a collection of people who valued character over currency. The offers to help poured in. The chef from Rome, Marco, insisted on designing the menu and flying in to oversee the food as his wedding gift. The photojournalist, Anna, offered to capture the day with her signature candid style. My sister Margaret took charge of the flowers, and Isabella, the architect, began sketching a plan for an impromptu dance floor on the stone patio. Our secret last-minute wedding was no longer just an idea. It was a collaborative project, a conspiracy of joy being plotted by a small, loyal army of our dearest friends. The month leading up to the dual wedding day became a fascinating study in contrasts. I received regular secondhand updates from Margaret, who was, of course, still on the official family mailing list. Her reports, delivered with a mixture of horror and glee, painted a picture of a high-stress, high-budget corporate merger. "You will not believe this," she whispered conspiratorially one evening. "Chloe has created 3 separate color-coded spreadsheets for the seating charts. Apparently, one of her father's investors cannot be seated with a view of the service entrance. And Daniel is in charge of creating a brand synergy deck for the gift bags." "A what?" "A brand synergy deck, Eleanor. I am not making this up." The stories were a litany of status-driven anxieties, a frantic international search for a specific type of Belgian lace, a heated debate about whether the champagne should be Dom Perignon or Krug, an argument over the font on the invitations, which Chloe felt was not aspirational enough. In stark, joyful contrast, the planning for Operation Counter Wedding was a seamless, collaborative, and utterly delightful affair. Our preparations were not about perfection. They were about personality. One sunny afternoon, our catering committee, Julian, myself, and his chef friend Marco, sat in my garden tasting wines. We didn't consult a sommelier. We just opened bottles and laughed. Marco declared the food must be simple, honest, and full of love. A family-style Italian feast served on long, rustic tables. My dress was found on a spontaneous trip to a small boutique with my sister. A simple, elegant, cream-colored silk dress that made me feel more like myself than anything I had ever worn. Julian decided to wear a handsome light linen suit he had bought years ago in Florence. Our entertainment wasn't a high-priced band. Julian's novelist friend, a talented classical guitarist, offered to play. For the dancing, we created a collaborative playlist, a wild, eclectic mix of Motown, 70s rock, Italian folk songs, and French café music. My garden, my sanctuary, became a bustling, joyful hub of creative energy. We were not curating an image. We were simply gathering the people we loved to celebrate the love we had found. The contrast between our 2 worlds, our 2 weddings, could not have been more profound. Theirs was a performance designed to be watched. Ours was a celebration designed to be lived. The wedding day arrived, a perfect sun-drenched Saturday in late June. While I did not see it with my own eyes, the images of Daniel and Chloe's ceremony were so relentlessly documented on social media by their guests that I felt as if I had a front row seat. The pictures, which began to flood my phone's social media feeds in the early evening, were, I had to admit, visually stunning. The setting was a pristine stretch of private beach on the Cape. An enormous arch of white orchids and hydrangeas, the result of that frantic international flower search, framed the impossibly blue ocean. Hundreds of guests were seated in perfect rows of white chairs, a sea of tasteful, expensive beige. It looked less like a wedding and more like a high-fashion photo shoot for a luxury resort. Chloe was a vision of perfection in her Belgian lace dress. She glided down the aisle on the arm of her proud, beaming father, a man whose net worth was the unspoken guest of honor. She looked beautiful, but there was a brittle, anxious quality to her smile. She was not a bride, she was an actress, playing the lead role in the most important production of her life, and she was terrified of forgetting a line. Daniel stood at the altar, looking handsome in his tailored suit, but he too looked less like a groom overcome with love and more like a nervous junior partner about to present a high-stakes deal to the board. His eyes darted from Chloe to her father to the assembled crowd of influential guests. He was not just getting married. He was being formally accepted into the Sterling family empire, and the pressure was immense. The ceremony, from the video clips posted online, was as impersonal as the setting. The vows were generic, the readings forgettable. The entire affair felt sterile, performative, a beautiful, hollow shell. The guests seemed more interested in their phones, in networking, in seeing and being seen. Later, the reception photos appeared, a grand ballroom, towering floral centerpieces, and a 10-piece band. Chloe and Daniel's first dance was a carefully choreographed, technically perfect waltz. They moved with practiced grace, but there was no warmth, no joy, no spark of genuine connection in their eyes. They were two beautiful, perfect strangers performing their roles flawlessly for the camera. It was, by all accounts, the perfect wedding, a triumph of logistics, of branding, of social climbing. It had cost a fortune, and it looked like it. It was a perfect, beautiful, and utterly joyless affair. And as I looked at the photos of my son, his smile tight, his eyes full of a strange, hollow sadness, my heart didn't ache with the pain of being excluded. It ached with a deep, profound pity for him. He had gotten his perfect day. I only wished he looked happy about it. At the very same time that Daniel and Chloe were exchanging their generic vows against the backdrop of the indifferent ocean, a very different kind of ceremony was unfolding 300 miles away. My own wedding was not a production. It was a miracle of collaborative, last-minute joy, held in the place I loved most in the world. My own garden. The garden, my life's work, had never looked more beautiful. My sister Margaret and my friends had transformed it into a bohemian fairy tale. Strings of twinkling fairy lights were woven through the branches of the old oak tree. Mason jars, filled with wildflowers and flickering candles, lined the stone pathways. The air was thick with the scent of my prize-winning roses, a fragrant, natural alternative to Chloe's imported orchids. Our 50 guests were not seated in rigid, perfect rows. They were gathered in a loose, happy circle on the lawn, some on mismatched vintage chairs, others on colorful blankets. They were not a sea of beige. They were a vibrant tapestry of colors and styles. My processional was not a stately traditional march. Julian's novelist friend sat on a stool under the oak tree, his classical guitar filling the air with a beautiful, gentle melody. I did not walk down a formal aisle. I simply walked through my garden, on a path I had laid with my own hands, toward the man I loved. I wore my simple, elegant cream silk dress. In my hair, my sister had woven a crown of fresh lavender and baby's breath from the garden. I felt not like a bride playing a part, but like myself, comfortable, happy, and radiant with the joy that came from deep within. Julian stood waiting for me by the old stone bird bath, which was now filled with floating gardenias. He wore his light linen suit, his handsome face craggy and beautiful in the late afternoon sun, his eyes shining with a love so pure and profound, it took my breath away. He was not a nervous business partner. He was a man who had seen the world and had decided that all he ever wanted was to stand here in this garden with me. Our ceremony was officiated by his former editor, who spoke with the wisdom and wit of a life spent in pursuit of the truth. Our vows were not pre-written platitudes. We had written them ourselves, full of private jokes, shared memories, and heartfelt promises. Julian spoke of finding a home in my arms after a lifetime of wandering. I spoke of him being the unexpected, miraculous second spring of my life. There was not a dry eye in the garden. After we were pronounced husband and wife, there was no polite, restrained applause. There was a roar of joyous, heartfelt cheering. We were simply swallowed up in a sea of warm, loving hugs. The reception was a glorious, chaotic, and utterly perfect feast. Marco, the Italian chef, had outdone himself. Long, rustic tables were laden with platters of homemade pasta, grilled fish, fresh salads, and crusty bread. The wine flowed freely. The conversation was loud, a symphony of laughter and storytelling. Our first dance was not a choreographed waltz. It was to an old, scratchy Etta James record, At Last, played on a vintage turntable. Julian held me close, and we swayed together, not as performers, but as two people deeply, ridiculously, and joyfully in love. Later, as the sun set and the fairy lights glowed in the twilight, the playlist kicked in. My 70-year-old sister danced with Julian's Pulitzer Prize-winning friend. The young novelist and the celebrated photojournalist started an impromptu conga line. I kicked off my shoes and danced barefoot on the cool stone with Julian, my heart so full it felt like it might burst. The entire event was captured by Julian's friend, the photojournalist, Anna. She moved through the crowd like a ghost, her camera capturing not posed portraits, but stolen moments of pure, unadulterated joy. It was not a perfect wedding by Chloe's standards. It was messy, a little loud, and entirely unpretentious. But it was real. It was a day filled with so much authentic love and genuine happiness that it shone with a light all its own. 2 days after the wedding, while Julian and I were still basking in the warm, quiet afterglow, an email arrived from Anna, the photojournalist. The subject line was simple: a little something to remember the day. Attached was a video file. It wasn't a long, boring wedding video. It was a perfectly edited, 3-minute masterpiece. Anna had taken the most beautiful, candid moments she had captured and set them to an old, joyful, slightly scratchy recording of La Vie en Rose by Louis Armstrong. The video opened with a close-up shot of my hands tending to my orchids, then dissolved to a shot of Julian arriving with the sunflowers. It cut to a rapid, joyful montage of stolen moments from the wedding. My sister Margaret, laughing so hard she had to wipe away a tear. Marco, the chef, theatrically kissing his fingertips after tasting a sauce. Julian's face as he saw me walking toward him, his expression a mixture of awe and profound love. Our hands clasped together. It showed us dancing barefoot on the patio, the fairy lights twinkling around us like captured stars. It showed our friends, that vibrant, eclectic group, talking, laughing, embracing. There was nothing posed, nothing artificial. It was just joy, pure, unadulterated, authentic joy, captured on film. The video ended with a final lingering shot of Julian and me sitting together on a bench at the edge of the garden, silhouetted against the deep purple of the twilight sky, my head resting on his shoulder. A perfect, quiet, and deeply romantic final image. I watched it with tears streaming down my face. It was the most beautiful wedding gift I could have ever imagined. I immediately forwarded it to my sister Margaret with a simple note. Thought you would love this. Margaret, being Margaret, did not just love it. She understood its power. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a notification. She had posted the video to her social media page. Her caption was a work of understated, elegant genius. She didn't mention Daniel. She didn't mention his wedding. She simply wrote, "Some weekends are for celebrating the people you love. So incredibly proud and happy to celebrate my beautiful sister, Eleanor Hayes, as she begins her next wonderful chapter with her amazing new husband, Julian Croft. This is what true happiness looks like." The video, with its warm, intimate feel and its beautiful, authentic moments, was a stark and immediate contrast to the stiff, emotionally sterile photos that Chloe had been meticulously curating and posting from her own wedding all weekend. Chloe's photos were a performance. Our video was a documentary of a real, lived experience. And in the world of social media, authenticity, it turned out, was magnetic. The effect was instantaneous and explosive. First, comments poured in from our friends who had been there. "The most beautiful wedding I've ever been to. So much love in one garden. This is everything." Then, the second wave began. These were the extended family members and old family friends who had been invited to Daniel's wedding. The ones who had been told a vague story about my absence. Perhaps that I was unwell. They saw Margaret's post, and their confusion was palpable. The comments started to appear on Chloe's perfectly curated professional wedding photos. Beneath a picture of her and Daniel cutting their towering $10,000 cake, a cousin from Chicago wrote, "So beautiful. But wait, I'm so confused. Did Aunt Eleanor get married this weekend too? Margaret's video is amazing." Under a photo of the bridal party posing stiffly on the beach, an old friend of mine commented, "Congratulations, Daniel. But my goodness, your mother looks so happy in her wedding video. I didn't even know she was seeing someone. She is absolutely glowing." Each comment was a small, polite, but deeply disruptive bomb landing right in the middle of Chloe's carefully constructed narrative. The two events she had so carefully tried to keep separate were now colliding in the most public of forums. The video began to be shared. Friends of friends, distant relatives, people captivated by its warmth and the unspoken subtext. The mystery of the two weddings on the same day was irresistible. The narrative of the Hayes family wedding weekend was being hijacked. By Monday morning, the video had, in the strange parlance of the modern world, gone viral within our extended social circle. Chloe had wanted a wedding that would be the talk of the town. And it was, but not for any of the reasons she had intended. The most talked about bride of the weekend, it turned out, was not the 32-year-old socialite in the Belgian lace dress. It was the 62-year-old landscape architect in a simple silk dress, dancing barefoot in her own garden. Thousands of miles away, in a luxurious overwater bungalow in Bora Bora, Daniel and Chloe were trying to decompress. They were surrounded by a paradise of turquoise water and white sand. But their digital world was in flames. Their honeymoon, which was supposed to be a blissful, phone-free escape, was being rudely interrupted. Their phones, which they had promised to ignore, began to buzz and ping with an alarming, incessant frequency. First, texts from confused friends. Then, a flood of notifications, tagged posts, and direct messages. Finally, annoyed and intrigued, they logged in. And there it was, the video. Daniel watched it first, standing in the middle of their luxurious bungalow, his face a mask of stunned, slack-jawed disbelief. He saw his mother, the woman he had dismissed as an awkward, intense relic, looking more beautiful, more vibrant, more alive than he had seen her in years. He saw her surrounded by a crowd of interesting, laughing, joyful people. He saw her look at a handsome, distinguished stranger with a look of pure, unadulterated love. He saw her getting married. This was a reality his brain could not compute. His mother did not have a secret life. His mother's world was supposed to be small, quiet, and centered entirely around him. This joyful, radiant woman in the video was a stranger to him. Chloe watched it over his shoulder, and her reaction was not stunned confusion. It was pure, undiluted, narcissistic rage. She saw her perfectly planned, impossibly expensive wedding, her grand social statement, being completely and utterly upstaged. She saw the genuine, effortless joy of my wedding, and she recognized it for what it was, the one thing her money could not buy. The comments were the most infuriating part. This is what real love looks like. So much more authentic than those stuffy society weddings. Her garden is more beautiful than any resort. Each one was a direct, personal attack on her taste, her choices, her wedding. "Who is that man?" she hissed, her manicured finger pointing at Julian's smiling face on the screen. "And how dare she? How dare she do this to me on my wedding weekend?" The me was telling. She saw this as a deliberate, malicious act of social sabotage aimed directly at her. "She planned this!" Chloe shrieked, her voice rising, all traces of her carefully modulated composure gone. "She did this to humiliate me, to upstage me. She couldn't stand that I was having a beautiful wedding, so she had to create this pathetic little garden party to steal my spotlight." Daniel, still reeling, could only stammer, I don't understand. She was so calm. Calm? She was plotting." Chloe snatched the phone from his hand. "This is war, Daniel. Your mother has declared war, and you are going to call her right now, and you are going to shut this down." The tranquil paradise of their honeymoon was shattered. It had been invaded by the one thing Chloe Sterling could not tolerate. Someone else, particularly someone she had written off as irrelevant, looking happier, more elegant, and infinitely more authentic than she did. The call from Bora Bora came through in the late afternoon, Italy time. Julian and I were sitting at a small, sun-dappled table at a trattoria overlooking Lake Garda. We were on our own honeymoon, a quiet, unpretentious, and deeply romantic trip. The air was warm, and we were sharing a bottle of crisp local white wine. I was, in that moment, experiencing a state of pure, unadulterated contentment. My phone buzzed on the table. It was Daniel. A small, cold knot formed in my stomach, a phantom limb of my old life, aching in the midst of my new one. I knew this call was coming. Should I answer it? I asked Julian. "Of course," he said, his voice calm and supportive. "The last chapter of the old book needs to be written before we can fully enjoy the new one." I took a sip of my wine, a small act of fortification, and answered the call, putting it on speaker so Julian could hear. "Hello, Daniel," I said, my voice as serene as the lake in front of me. "Mom, what did you do?" His voice was not serene. It was a chaotic, sputtering explosion of fury and bewilderment, the sound of a man whose perfectly ordered world had just been turned upside down. "I'm not sure I know what you mean, dear," I replied calmly. "Don't play dumb with me," he shouted, and I could hear Chloe's high, angry hiss in the background, feeding him lines. "Your wedding video. It's everywhere. The entire family is calling. Everyone's talking about it. You upstaged us. On our honeymoon." The sheer, breathtaking entitlement of his accusation was almost comical. He was furious that my happiness had inconvenienced him. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" he continued, his voice rising. "This was some kind of revenge because we didn't invite you. So you decided to throw your own wedding on the same day, just to humiliate Chloe, just to make us look bad." I let him vent. I let the torrent of his baseless, self-centered accusations wash over me. I looked at Julian, who was watching me with a look of profound love and quiet admiration. He gave me a small, encouraging nod. When Daniel finally sputtered to a halt, I took another calm sip of my wine. "Daniel," I said, and my voice was not angry, not defensive, but full of a new, unshakable peace that seemed to travel across the thousands of miles between us and quiet him. Let me be very clear. My wedding had absolutely nothing to do with you. Nothing to do with me? Daniel's voice, a mixture of disbelief and outrage, crackled across the line from his tropical paradise to my tranquil lakeside table. How can you say that? You got married on the same day. You released that video. You made our wedding into a joke. I took a moment before I responded, swirling the pale gold wine in my glass, watching the Italian sun dance on its surface. I was no longer the woman he had spoken to a month ago. That woman, the one who had quietly absorbed his insults, who had allowed her own feelings to be secondary to his comfort, was gone. In her place was a woman who had chosen herself, a woman who was sitting beside her new wonderful husband, a woman who was, for the first time in a very long time, completely and utterly free. Daniel, I said, my voice full of that new, unshakable peace. You told me not to come to your wedding because my presence would be awkward. You told me I was a source of dissonant energy. You made it very clear that my role in your new life was to be a small, quiet, and preferably invisible one. I paused, letting my words sink in, letting him remember his own casual cruelty. And I accepted that, I continued calmly. I did not protest. I did not argue. I did not, as you so feared, make things awkward. I accepted your terms. You defined the boundaries of our new relationship. You told me, in no uncertain terms, that your life and my life were now separate things. On the other end of the line, there was only a stunned, sputtering silence. I was using his own cold corporate logic against him. So, I took you at your word, I said. I decided to build a life of my own, a life that was not small or quiet, a life that was large and joyful. I chose to fill my world with people who do not find me awkward, with a man who does not find me intense, but who loves me for exactly who I am. I looked across the table at Julian. He reached out and covered my hand with his touch a warm, steady anchor. My wedding, Daniel, was not an act of revenge, I said, my voice clear and firm. It was an act of joy. It was a celebration of the wonderful, happy life I have built for myself. My happiness is not a comment on your wedding. It is a comment on my life. I delivered the final, conclusive thought. Julian and I are very happy. I truly hope one day you and Chloe can be too. Before he could formulate a response, before Chloe could feed him another line, I said, "Goodbye, Daniel. Enjoy your honeymoon." And I ended the call. I placed my phone face down on the table, a small symbolic act of severing the connection to my old life and its attendant dramas. A profound silence fell over our small table, broken only by the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore. The furious, bewildered silence of my son, thousands of miles away, was his own to grapple with. Julian squeezed my hand. "Are you all right?" he asked. I looked at him, at his handsome, kind face, at the love and respect shining in his eyes. I looked out at the breathtaking beauty of Lake Garda, the mountains a hazy, majestic purple in the late afternoon light. I took a deep breath, and it felt like the first truly free breath I had taken in years. The cold knot of dread, of maternal obligation, of a lifetime of putting my son's comfort before my own, was finally completely gone. "I am more than all right, my love," I said, a slow, genuine smile spreading across my face. "I am happy." It was the simple, unadorned truth. Daniel and Chloe's rejection, as painful as it was, had been a strange and unexpected gift. It had been the final push I needed to stop defining myself by my relationship to others, as a widow, as a mother, and to start defining myself as, simply, Eleanor. My happiness was not a weapon I had wielded against my son. It was a shield I had built for myself. The viral video had not been a calculated act of sabotage. It had simply been an honest, beautiful reflection of that joy, and its power had been in its undeniable authenticity. We sat for a long time, sipping our wine, holding hands, not needing to speak. The sun began to dip below the mountains, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and pink, the color of a new beginning. I thought of Daniel and Chloe in their luxurious prison of a honeymoon, their anger a storm in a teacup thousands of miles away. Perhaps one day he would understand. But that was his journey, not mine. I had been given a choice. I could have accepted the small, quiet, awkward role my son had assigned me, sitting alone on the day of his wedding. Or I could choose something else. I could choose joy. I could choose love. I could choose life. I raised my glass, the crystal catching the last golden rays of the Italian sun. Julian raised his to meet mine. The gentle clink of our glasses was a quiet, personal toast. Not to victory, not to revenge, but to the simple, profound, and radical act of choosing our own happy ending. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.